Memory is a funny thing. It isn't stored in the grand moments, not really. It lives in the small details. The specific jingle of a bell above a corner shop door, the feel of warm coins clutched in your hand, the impossible choice, staring at a wall of colourful wrappers, deciding how to spend 10 pence of your universe. We think of these things, these chocolates, these sweets, as just simple treats, but they weren't, were they? They were the currency of the playground, a truce offering after an argument, the grand prize at the bottom of a party bag. They were tiny, sugary time capsules, each one a marker of a specific time and a specific place in our lives. And when they disappear, a small piece of our own story seems to disappear with them. We just accept it. One day they're there on the shelf, and the next they're gone, replaced by something new, something different. But have you ever stopped to wonder why? The stories behind why these beloved brands vanish are often a fascinating mix of corporate strategy, changing tastes, and simple, cold, hard economics. Today, we open the case files on 10 of Britain's most lamented lost snacks. We're going beyond the simple nostalgia to uncover the real stories of why they were famous and why they were, ultimately, and sometimes brutally, discontinued. Our investigation begins with two titans, two sweets that weren't just popular, they were cultural icons that defined the very eras they lived in. These are the fallen monuments of the sweet shop.
Our first story begins in the long shadow of the Second World War. Britain in 1950 was a nation of resilience, but also of rationing. It was a grey, austere world. And into this world, the American-owned Mars Company, from its factory in the distinctly unglamorous town of Slough, Berkshire, decided to inject a small, square burst of colour and optimism. They called it Spangles. Spangles weren't just a new sweet, they were a symbol of hope. Launched a full year before sugar rationing finally ended, their arrival was a seismic event. To purchase a tube, you initially had to surrender precious points from your ration book. This elevated them from a simple confection to a coveted luxury. They were intensely fruity, brightly coloured, and came in a distinctive tube wrapper that felt futuristic at the time. But Spangles held a strange duality. Alongside the standard fruit flavours that everyone loved, Mars inexplicably produced a variety called Old English. This selection contained flavours no child would ever willingly choose: licorice, pear drop, and the baffling humbug. It was less of a treat and more of a dare, a bizarre collection of flavours seemingly curated from a grandparent's coat pocket. The cultural impact of Spangles was immense. They were cheap, everywhere, and became part of the fabric of British childhood for over 3 decades. But the true shared experience of a Spangle wasn't just its taste, it was its unique and slightly terrifying physical properties. Once cracked, the edges of a Spangle could become lethally sharp. A playground rumour persisted for years that a broken Spangle was sharper than a shard of glass. While this was likely an exaggeration, there is no doubt that Spangles were responsible for more cuts to the tongue and mouth than any other sweet in history. It was a treat that came with its own built-in physical risk assessment.
So why did this post-war hero disappear? The official story points to a simple decline in sales by the early 1980s. The market had become saturated with new, more exciting sweets, particularly from abroad. The humble, hard-boiled Spangle began to look, well, a bit old-fashioned. In 1984, Mars quietly discontinued the brand, ending a 34-year reign. There was an attempted comeback in 1995, driven by a wave of 70s nostalgia, but it failed to capture the public's imagination. Perhaps some things are just too deeply rooted in their own time. Spangles belonged to an era of making do, of finding joy in simple things. And maybe, just maybe, a time when a sweet being a potential hazard was considered part of its charm. If Spangles represented post-war optimism, our next icon represented the gritty, no-nonsense attitude of the 1970s. This wasn't a sweet for quiet contemplation. This was a challenge, a dental endurance test wrapped in chocolate. This was the Texan Bar. Launched by the British firm Rowntrees of York in 1972, the Texan was a formidable beast, a slab of chewy nougat and incredibly firm toffee, all coated in milk chocolate. In an era of Western movies and TV shows, its branding was perfect. The slogan, delivered by a Clint Eastwood-esque cartoon cowboy, was a simple, confident dare. "Sure is a mighty chew." And it was. The Texan Bar was less of a snack and more of a long-term commitment. Eating one required a strategy. Do you try to bite through it and risk dental damage, or do you slowly gnaw at the corners? It had a legendary toughness that could silence even the most hyperactive child for an entire car journey. This quality made it a firm favorite amongst parents. The newspaper ads of the time leaned heavily into this macho image, positioning it as the ultimate snack for the working man. For the price of just a few pence, you got a snack that lasted. Its fame was cemented by its iconic TV adverts. The animated cowboy, beleaguered by bandits or peril, would take a bite of a Texan and be rendered unable to speak or cry for help due to the sheer chewiness, leading to his comical capture. It was a masterclass in turning a product's most challenging feature into its greatest marketing strength. But the world was changing. By the end of the 70s, tastes were shifting towards lighter, crisper textures, like the wafers found in a Kit Kat. The dense, jaw-breaking experience of the Texan began to feel dated. In 1981, just 9 years after its grand arrival, the cowboy rode off into the sunset for good.
The legend of the Texan, however, refused to die. It became one of the most requested defunct chocolate bars in UK history. The public demand was so great that Nestlé, who had since acquired Rowntrees, resurrected it for a limited edition run in 2005 as part of a nostalgia promotion. The bars sold out almost instantly. For a brief moment, a new generation could experience the legendary chew, and an older generation could relive it. But it was just a fleeting visit. The Texan Bar remains, for all intents and purposes, a delicious, jaw-achingly tough memory of a grittier time. If the stories of Spangles and the Texan Bar are tales of products that defined their times, our next two stories are different. They are tales from a more modern, more aggressive era of corporate warfare. These are the stories of the challengers, the blockbusters, the products designed with immense ambition and astronomical budgets created for one purpose: to dominate the market. Our first case file is perhaps the most dramatic boom and bust story in British confectionery history. To understand the story of Fuse, you first have to understand the world it was born into. The mid-1990s in Britain. It was the era of cool Britannia. Britpop was on the radio, the Union Jack was a fashion statement again, and there was a sense of optimism in the air. But behind this cultural renaissance, a quiet war was being waged, a cold, chocolatey war. For decades, the British confectionery market had been a battleground for three titans: Nestlé, Mars, and the historical giant, Cadbury. For years, Cadbury had been the undisputed king of pure chocolate. Dairy milk wasn't just a product, it was a national institution made at their legendary factory in Burnville, Birmingham. But Mars had a different strategy. They dominated the filled bar category. If you wanted something more than just chocolate, if you wanted nougat, caramel, peanuts, you bought a Mars bar or a Snickers. They were seen as more substantial, more of a proper snack. Cadbury knew they had a gap in their arsenal. They needed a contender, not just another chocolate bar, but a blockbuster, a bar that could fight Snickers on its own turf. And so, deep within the walls of Burnville, a top-secret project was born. Its mission: to create the ultimate chocolate bar of the 1990s. They called it, simply, Project Fuse. The team at Cadbury weren't just making a sweet, they were solving an engineering problem. How do you pack a chocolate bar with raisins, peanuts, crispy cereal, and fudge pieces and suspend them perfectly within solid milk chocolate? It was a delicate, complex process. The result was a bar with a texture unlike anything else. It wasn't layered like a Mars bar. It was a chaotic, delicious fusion of ingredients in every single bite. But a great product is nothing without a great launch. And the launch of Fuse was anything but quiet. Cadbury allocated a staggering £10 million marketing budget to introduce Fuse to the nation, an almost unheard of sum for a chocolate bar at the time. They picked a date, Tuesday, the 24th of September 1996. They didn't just call it a launch day, they christened it Fuse Day.
They handed out 3 million free bars across the country. They even held a press conference in London, not just for the bar, but for a fictional rock band they'd created, also named Fuse, who performed the theme song for the TV advert. It was a marketing blitz on a scale the industry had rarely seen. And it worked. It didn't just work, it shattered all expectations. In its first week on sale, Fuse sold 40 million bars. Let that sink in. 40 million. By the end of its first year, over 70 million had been sold. The newspaper headlines were ecstatic. Cadbury hadn't just created a contender, they had unleashed a phenomenon. For a moment, it seemed like the chocolate war was over and a new king had been crowned. For a few glorious years, Fuse was everywhere. It became the undisputed champion of the vending machine, the go-to choice in newsagents up and down the country. It wasn't just another option, it was a destination. For a generation of British school kids and office workers, the late 90s tasted of the chaotic, satisfying crunch of a Fuse bar. It felt substantial, modern, a perfect product for its time. Cadbury had captured the spirit of the decade in a purple wrapper. And then, in 2003, it was gone. There was no grand announcement, no farewell tour. It simply vanished from the shelves. One of the most successful product launches in British history, a bar that was beloved by millions, was culled without a word. The public was left with a simple, baffling question: why? The official reason, the one you'll find buried in corporate reports, is a cold piece of business jargon: product portfolio rationalization. The truth is, by the early 2000s, Cadbury's catalogue of products was enormous. The company decided it needed to streamline, to focus its resources on what it called its core brands. These were the heritage products, the titans like dairy milk that had been around for generations. Fuse, for all its success, was still the new kid on the block. It was popular, but it wasn't a legacy. In the sterile logic of a boardroom, it was deemed expendable. But many believe there's more to the story. The second theory is one of economics. The very thing that made Fuse so unique, its complex fusion of ingredients, also made it expensive to produce. The intricate manufacturing process required to suspend everything perfectly in chocolate was far more costly than that of a simple bar of dairy milk or a layered crunchy. In a world of tightening budgets and fluctuating cocoa prices, the bar with the thinner profit margin, no matter how popular, is always the most vulnerable. It may have been a victim of its own ambition. Then there is the third, more intriguing theory. Was Fuse perhaps too successful? Did it cannibalize sales not from its rivals at Mars and Nestle, but from within Cadbury itself? If a customer chose a Fuse, that was a customer who wasn't choosing a more profitable, cheaper-to-make bar from Cadbury's own line. It's possible that Fuse became such a monster it started eating its own family.
Whatever the true reason, the public didn't forget. The disappearance of Fuse left a void. In the years that followed, the internet gave a voice to the forgotten fans. Facebook groups like Bring Back Cadbury's Fuse Bar amassed tens of thousands of members. Online petitions were signed by legions of people demanding its return.
it became a piece of modern folklore. And then, for a brief, tantalizing moment, the ghost returned. In October of 2015, as part of a Halloween promotion called Cadbury Legends, the Fuse bar reappeared on shelves for a limited time. The public response was frantic. People bought them by the boxload, a desperate attempt to recapture a taste of the past. But as quickly as it came, it was gone again. The story of Fuse is more than just a story about a chocolate bar. It's a lesson in the brutal logic of business and the unpredictable nature of public taste. But more than that, it's a testament to how something so simple, so everyday, can weave itself into the fabric of our shared memory, leaving a phantom taste that for many has never truly faded away. While the story of Fuse is one of a modern blockbuster, our next challenger's story is a tale of a much earlier, much more audacious corporate duel. Long before Fuse was conceived, Cadbury had already tried to take on the king of the filled bar market. The target was the Mars bar itself, and Cadbury's weapon of choice, launched in 1967, was a bar named Aztec. The strategy was one of breathtaking simplicity. Copy your rival's most successful product. The Aztec bar was, to put it charitably, a heartfelt tribute to the Mars bar. It contained nougat, caramel, and was coated in milk chocolate. The name Aztec was chosen to evoke the exotic, ancient origins of cocoa in Central America, a clever marketing trick to give it a sense of mystique that the bluntly named Mars bar lacked. And for a time, the assault worked. The Aztec bar was hugely popular throughout the late 60s and 70s. It was a genuine two-party system in the world of chewy chocolate bars. On the shelves of Britain's sweet shops, a fierce battle for loyalty was waged. For a generation, you were either an Aztec person or a Mars person. The competition was real. But the Aztec bar was fighting an uphill battle. The Mars bar had been on the market since 1932. It was deeply entrenched in the British psyche. It was the original, the default choice. To beat the king, you can't just be as good, you have to be noticeably better, or fundamentally different. The Aztec, for all its quality, was ultimately too similar to its rival. It was the challenger that never quite managed to land a knockout blow. By 1978, Cadbury conceded defeat. The Aztec was withdrawn, leaving the Mars bar to reign supreme once more. The war was over. But the story doesn't quite end there. The Aztec had won a place in the nation's heart, and its memory lingered. So much so that in the year 2000, driven by a wave of nostalgia, Cadbury brought it back for a limited time as the Aztec 2000. It was a brief, celebratory comeback tour for a beloved contender who, despite losing the war, was still remembered as a legend. For every corporate giant locked in a blockbuster war, there exists a stranger, more wonderful world of confectionery. This is the world of the oddballs, the eccentrics, the products that make you look at the wrapper and wonder, who on earth thought of this, and how did it ever get approved? These are the stories of the lovable weirdos, the snacks that defied logic, captured a cult following, and for a brief, shining moment brought a little bit of glorious madness to the British sweet shop.
British sweet shop. Our first exhibit in this gallery of the strange is a sweet that suffered from a permanent identity crisis. Was it a refreshing mint, or was it a chewy sweet? The answer was, confusingly, both. This was the Pacer. The story begins in the 1960s, when Mars launched a product called the Opal Mint. It was a simple, white, spearmint-flavoured chew, a sibling to the much more famous Opal Fruits. It was a respectable, if slightly unexciting, product, but in 1976, the marketing department decided it needed a rebrand. It needed excitement. It needed stripes. The Opal Mint was reborn as the Pacer.
The key innovation, the great leap forward that was meant to set the world alight, was the addition of 3 thin green stripes. The slogan proudly declared this new striped creation was "Peppermint striped with freshness." A brilliant piece of marketing, slightly undermined by the fact that the sweet was, and always had been, spearmint flavored. But let's not let facts get in the way of a good slogan. The very concept of a chewy mint was a paradox. Mints were for slow, sophisticated sucking, like a Polo or a Trebor Extra Strong. Chews were for, well, chewing. Pacers sat in a bizarre no-man's land between the two. The texture was identical to an opal fruit, but the taste was pure, unadulterated, minty freshness. The experience was unsettling at first. It felt like you were chewing toothpaste, but in a way that slowly became rather pleasant. For a time, this unique proposition found its audience. Pacers were a staple of school tuck shops and newsagents throughout the late 70s and early 80s. They were the mint you could eat without looking like you were trying too hard. But its weirdness was also its weakness. It was never a market leader. It was too strange to compete with the fruit chew giants like Opal Fruits and Chewits, and too playful to be taken seriously by the powerful mint establishment. By 1985, the Pacer quietly vanished from the shelves. It didn't die in a blaze of glory, it simply faded away, the inevitable fate of a product that couldn't quite figure out its own identity, but was loved by a dedicated few for its wonderfully confusing charm. If the Pacer was a sweet with an identity crisis, our next oddball was a chocolate bar that thought it was a tropical holiday. It was an explosion of exotic ambition that was either your idea of paradise or your worst nightmare, all wrapped in a distinctive blue wrapper. This was the Cadbury's Cabana Bar. Launched in the mid-1980s, the Cabana Bar was Cadbury's attempt to capture the success of the coconut-based Bounty Bar, but with a strange, flamboyant twist. The ingredients list read like a fever dream: a coconut and caramel center mixed with glacéed cherries. The glacéed cherry, that strange, almost unnaturally red confection usually found atop a Battenberg cake or in a fruitcake at Christmas. Cadbury decided to take this divisive ingredient and make it the star of its own chocolate bar. It was a bold, some might say reckless decision.
The marketing was pure 80s escapism. The television adverts featured beautiful people on sun-drenched beaches, swaying palm trees, and a calypso-style jingle promising tropical magic. The message was clear. This wasn't just a chocolate bar you ate on a rainy Tuesday in Coventry. This was a taste of paradise. It was a fantasy of the Caribbean for the price of about 25p. The reality of the Cabana Bar was that it became one of the most divisive chocolate bars of all time. You were either a Cabana person or you weren't. There was no middle ground. For its fans, the combination of coconut, caramel, and the sweet burst of cherry was a unique and delicious symphony of flavors. For its detractors, it was a culinary catastrophe, an unholy union of textures and tastes. For a few years, the Cabana Bar's tropical magic was enough to keep it on the shelves. It was a splash of color and exoticism in an otherwise predictable market. But niche products, especially divisive ones, have a hard time surviving in the long run. The Cabana was too specific, too unusual, perhaps just too plain weird for the mainstream. By the early 1990s, the holiday was over. The Cabana Bar was discontinued, leaving its small but passionate fan base dreaming of a tropical paradise they could no longer taste. And so we arrive at our final chapter. We've seen the icons that defined an era, the ambitious challenges that flew too close to the sun, and the lovable oddballs that dared to be different. But this last chapter is dedicated to a different kind of snack, the quiet heroes. These weren't the show-offs. They didn't have blockbuster marketing campaigns or bizarre, divisive ingredients. They were simply there. The reliable, unassuming, everyday treats that formed the quiet backdrop of our lives. They were the contents of the kitchen cupboard, the currency of the tuck shop, the comforting presents you took for granted.
And perhaps because of that, their disappearance was the most subtle of all. They didn't crash, they just faded away, leaving a void many of us didn't notice until it was far too late. Our first quiet hero was the master of simplicity. In a world of ever more complex creations, it was just one thing done perfectly: a simple foil-wrapped disc of toffee. We are, of course, talking about the Toffo. Made by the legendary toffee firm Macintosh's, later Rowntree's, Toffo was a staple for decades. It came in a familiar tube, much like Spangles, but inside was a row of individually wrapped toffees. The ritual was a key part of the experience. The tearing of the paper tube, the unwrapping of the shiny foil, and finally the satisfying, long-lasting tube. The original was a classic plain toffee, but it was later joined by mint, banana, and assorted flavor varieties. Toffo was never the star of the show. It was a supporting actor. It was the sweet you bought with the change left over from your lunch money. It was the contents of the sweet bowl at your grandparents' house. It didn't demand attention. It just offered quiet, reliable satisfaction. Its advertising was simple, often featuring cartoon characters enjoying the long-lasting chew. There were no cowboys, no tropical islands. It was honest.
Its demise in 2008 was met not with a bang, but with a confused collective whisper. There was no grand announcement. Nestlé, its final owner, simply let it slip away as part of its ongoing mission to streamline its brands. For years afterwards, people would wander into a newsagent, look at the shelves, and a thought would slowly form. Hang on, what happened to Toffo? Its quiet life was followed by a quiet death, a poignant end for a humble everyday hero. While Toffo was a hero of simplicity, our next subject was a hero of playful, innovative design. It was a chocolate bar that doubled as an engineering marvel and, for a time, a piece of edible hardware. This was the Cadbury's Spira. Launched in the mid-1980s, the Spira was brilliantly simple in its concept. It was two hollow, twisted, corkscrewed fingers of Cadbury's dairy milk chocolate. That was it. No caramel, no wafer, no nougat, just pure chocolate, twisted into a new and exciting shape. Its unique structure was its entire identity. It had a different texture, a different snap, but its shape also gave it a secondary, unofficial purpose that quickly became its primary selling point. You could use it as a straw. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was a cultural phenomenon. The ultimate way to consume a Spira was to bite off both ends and use it to drink a hot cup of tea or hot chocolate. It was a race against time, a delicious game of chance. You had to slurp the hot liquid through the chocolate tube as fast as you could before the whole thing melted into a glorious gooey mess in your hands. It was fun. It was interactive. It transformed a simple snack into an experience. For nearly 2 decades, the Spira held its own, but in 2005, it too was quietly retired by Cadbury. No official reason was ever given, but again, it was likely a victim of portfolio simplification. Perhaps the complex moulding process made it less efficient to produce than a standard solid bar. Whatever the reason, the world became a slightly less playful place. We lost not just a chocolate bar, but our favourite, most delicious straw. Every great conflict in history has its forgotten soldiers. In the Great Wafer War, dominated for decades by the titan that is the Kit Kat, there was another combatant, a challenger that many who remember it swear was superior. Its name was the Banjo. Produced by Mars in the 1970s, the Banjo was a twin-finger wafer bar, but with a crucial difference. It wasn't just a plain wafer, it was coated in a layer of crushed peanuts before being covered in chocolate. It came in a distinctive bright red wrapper for the roast nut flavour and a cool blue one for a less common coconut variant. The Banjo was, by all accounts, delicious. It had the crispiness of a Kit Kat, but with the added nutty texture and flavour that gave it a satisfying, almost Snickers-like quality. It was a superb piece of product design, and for a time, It was a genuine rival on the shelves. But it was fighting a war it could never win. Kit Kat was, and is, a global behemoth. Its brand identity was absolute. The Banjo, for all its quality, was seen as the alternative, the underdog. In the brutal world of confectionery, there is rarely room for two products so similar. By the mid-1980s, Mars withdrew the Banjo from the market to focus on its other, more dominant brands. It remains a ghost of the wafer world, a cult classic whose fans still argue that the best team didn't win. We end our journey with a snack that wasn't just a treat, it was a jingle. Countdown, a multi-layered mission you could eat. It was, of course, the 5-4-3-2-1 bar.
Launched by Roundtree in 1982, the 5-4-3-2-1 was a masterpiece of construction. It contained 5 distinct elements, a fact it never let you forget. As the legendary TV advert proclaimed, it was 5 a wafer, 4 fondant, 3 Rice Krispies, 2 caramel, and 1 a thick coating of milk chocolate. The advert was perhaps one of the most memorable in British history. Set to an impossibly catchy space-age countdown jingle, it featured the comedian Ted Rogers and a plucky young astronaut. That jingle became an earworm that burrowed its way into the brain of every child in the country. You didn't just eat a 5-4-3-2-1, you sang its ingredients list first. The bar itself was a delight of textures. The crunch of the wafer, the softness of the fondant, the crispiness of the rice, the chew of the caramel, all brought together by chocolate. It felt like you were getting 5 snacks in one. But its complexity and its hyper-specific marketing may have also been its undoing. It was a product of the bombastic, slightly over-the-top early 80s. As tastes moved on, the all-singing, all-dancing 5-4-3-2-1 began to feel like a relic. It was discontinued in 1989, just 7 years after its spectacular launch. Yet for anyone who was there, the countdown never truly ended. The jingle lives on, a perfect 5-part memory of a bar that was, for a short time, out of this world. And so, our investigation comes to an end. 10 snacks, 10 stories. We've seen the fallen icons that defined a generation, the ambitious challenges that flew too close to the sun, the lovable oddballs that dared to be different, and the quiet heroes that formed the backdrop of our everyday lives.
On the surface, it's a story about sugar, chocolate, and clever marketing. But underneath, it's about something more. Each wrapper is a time capsule. Each forgotten flavor is a key that unlocks a specific moment in our own past. These stories show us how tastes change, how brutally competitive the world of business can be, and how fragile the things we take for granted truly are. They prove that a simple snack is never just a snack. It's a memory of a school playground, a corner shop on a rainy afternoon, a shared moment with a friend. They are part of the fabric of who we were. But this has just been our journey through the archives. The landscape of memory is vast and personal, and that's why we want to hear from you. We have one final important question. What is the one forgotten snack from your past that you would bring back just for one more day? It doesn't have to be famous, it just has to be yours. Tell us its name and its story in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for joining us on this trip down memory lane. We'll see you in the next one.